Good evening, everyone. Calling to order the Lincoln Safe and Successful Kids Interlocal Board for November 6, 2025 at 6:30. Want to just recognize the Open Meetings Act is posted at the back of the room. Can we please do a roll call of members present?
Barb Byer.
Here.
James Michael Bowers.
Here.
Riley Lasik, designated representative for Larry David Baird.
Here.
John Goodwin.
Present.
Mumgard.
Here.
Brody Weber.
Thanks so much. We'll move on to approval of the minutes for September 20, 2025. I would ask for a motion to approve the minutes as printed. Approved by, or a motion by Member Byer.
Yeah. I move approval of the minutes of September 25th, 2025 with a correction to delete Paul Gaussman, LPS Superintendent. We now have John Scaretta as our superintendent. He went from interim to permanent.
Great. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Seconded by Member Mumgard. Any discussion? Seeing none, can we please do a roll call vote?
Barb.
Yes.
Yes.
Riley.
Yes.
John.
Yes.
Annie.
Yes.
Okay, we'll move into public comment. The Safe and Successful Kids Interlocal Board welcomes comments from fellow citizens. At this time, we are taking public comment on any topic not listed on the agenda. The opportunity to comment on agenda items will come at a later point in the meeting. Is there anyone from the public here that would like to speak? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on to the next item of business. The report regarding school resource officers, protective programming, school perception, and data discipline for fiscal year 2024-2025. Just to reiterate, there's three primary areas funded with Safe and Successful Kids interlocal resources: proactive services like CLCs, preventative services for behavioral mental health services, and protective services like the school resource officers and threat assessment officers. Today's presentation relates to the last category, protective services. The report will include data regarding the school resource officer program, survey perception data, and LPS discipline data. I would like to introduce Brad Jacobson, who will provide a brief history.
Thank you, Chair Bowers. My name is Brad Jacobson, Associate Superintendent with Lincoln Public Schools. Thank you for the opportunity to share the School Resource Officer report with you. Several individuals will be presenting today as we share some background of the program and provide some SRO data from Lincoln Police Department, suspension data from LPS, and some overall takeaways and our team's recommendations for this program. Report includes a great deal of data. Data that comes up later might inform earlier data, might be informed by earlier data. So we humbly request that you note your questions as we go through the report, and then we will answer them at the end of the presentation. If you have clarifying questions about the data or the terminology on a particular slide, please feel free to ask at the conclusion of that segment as we change presenters. So here we go. LPS and the City of Lincoln share the goal of promoting school safety, which is an essential element of a positive and safe school climate. The list on the screen is a list of ongoing efforts and strategies that occur daily in LPS buildings to build positive relationships and a positive culture of learning in all schools in all of the Lincoln Public Schools. As part of that shared goal, LPS and LPD play specific roles. The school handles school discipline. The SRO handles law violations. Both LPS and LPD are part of the collaborative team with students, parents, behavioral health professionals, and the community in working to create a positive and safe school environment. In 2018, the City of Lincoln and Lincoln Public Schools signed an MOU listing the 6 goals of the SRO program. We believe it's important to read these goals aloud each time. Goal 1 is to create a common understanding that school administrators and teachers are ultimately responsible for school discipline and culture. Goal 2 is to minimize student discipline issues so they do not become school-based referrals to the juvenile justice system. Goal 3, to promote effectiveness and accountability. Goal 4, to provide training as valuable to SROs and appropriate LPS staff on effective strategies to work with students that align with program goals. Goal 5, to employ best practices so that all students are treated impartially without bias by SROs and LPS staff in alignment with applicable city and LPS equity policies. And Goal 6, to utilize best practices for training and oversight with the goal of reducing disproportionality. Within the same MOU, there was a requirement to generate a report measuring progress toward those 6 goals and share that publicly, which we are doing this evening. This agreement further tasked the SSKI board with the responsibility of evaluating these results of this report, to use the results to improve the program and to improve student outcomes. And a final goal must be to protect student data privacy, meaning some categories have really improved to the point that they're so small we can't necessarily report or disaggregate every single piece, which is a good sign. And so that's also a piece of the history that's important to understand. The evaluation process was created through involvement with community members, and that on the screen right now, the Interlocal Board created the evaluation process, including involvement with community members to measure progress towards 6 goals along with other relevant data, and we use the SSKI Board's public meeting, this meeting, as the method to share this with our community. Finally, as we get into the data here shortly, we do ask that you listen, as you listen, to consider the filter of the 3 statements posted here. Is the SRO program improving the safety of our schools? Is the SRO program elevating student discipline issues to law enforcement matters and ultimately contributing to a school-to-prison pipeline? And is there evidence that our ongoing training for LPS and LPD is demonstrating incremental growth and improvements? Today's report is extensive. We have identified the data that we feel is most relevant to the community and most directly related to the 6 goals identified in the original MOU. There's an archive of these slides. The full report and the executive summary will also be made available online for the community to access. This report begins with data from the Lincoln Police Department. So it's my pleasure to introduce Tricia Todd and Jeff Peterson with the Lincoln Police Department.
Thank you. Once again, I'm Tricia Todd. I am one of the crime analysts with the Lincoln Police Department, and this is my 3rd year working on this project, and I get to kick off the data portion. The Lincoln Police Department data starts out with calls for service. And call for service is any time the presence of an officer is requested. Anyone can request a call for service, and they can range from a lost cell phone to an assault in progress. In this section of the report, you'll hear me talk about the 4-year average, which is 2015 to 2019. The COVID years are not included in this portion of the report due to the impact of the pandemic. The calls for service in 24 and 25 were at 1,059 at Lincoln Public Middle and High Schools. That's down 19% from the 4-year average of 1,310. You can see the graph is very consistent between the calls for service at middle schools and high schools. The types of calls for service change throughout the last several years. These top 10 kind of switch between who places 3rd and who places 7th, but they remain mostly unchanged, and these top 10 calls for service represent 67% of all of the calls for service. If you have a keen eye for statistics, you'll see that the threat assessments are up 340% from the 4-year average, but remain very consistent throughout the last 3 years. A juvenile referral is when an officer has probable cause that a juvenile has committed a criminal offense, and that juvenile is referred to the county attorney's office. Calls for service with referrals are down 62% from the 4-year average. That number the 4-year average was 402. In this most recent school year of 24-25, the number is 152 calls for service that resulted in a referral or a citation. When we're looking at these numbers, we also have to look at the percentages, because if calls for service are going down and referrals are going down, we want to make sure that that's happening proportionately. So you'll see that the referral rate for Lincoln Public Schools calls for service resulting in referral is at 14% this most recent school year, which is down from 31% during the 4-year average. And those numbers might look familiar because they are the same percentage breakdowns as what happened in 2023 and 2024. In this part of the data, you can see that the SRO program is not elevating student discipline issues to law enforcement matters. So who are making these calls for service? Historically, teachers and staff initiate the highest percentage. However, that changed last year in 23 and 24 to administrators and continued in 24-25 with administrators initiating the highest percentage of calls for service at 29%. And this is the desired outcome of ongoing training with SROs and administrators. This is what we want to see happening. We just talked about the juvenile referrals. So who's initiating the calls for service that actually result in a referral into juvenile justice? And once again, administrators take the top spot with 61%. All other party types combined are 95% outside of law enforcement. So if there's a juvenile referral, there's a 95% chance that it's coming from a party other than law enforcement. Also, if you've got a quick eye for statistics, you'll see that the students are down to 3% this most recent school year. It's a pretty big drop, but I think this is a more accurate representation of who's actually initiating the calls for service, because the students are notifying their administrators, the administrators are notifying law enforcement, and it's being documented well in the police reports. The types of incidents that result in a referral: assaults, narcotics, vandalisms, disturbances, trespass, and traffic offense make up 81% of all of the calls for service that result in referral. And there was a reduction in each of these call for service types from the 4-year average, including a 74% decrease in narcotics and a 66% decrease in assaults, which are top 2 calls for service that result in a referral. Of these top 6, 78% were initiated by teacher, staff, or administrator. We like to take a closer look at the top 2 types of calls for service that result in referral, which is an assault and narcotics. In the assault calls for service, 59% of those are initiated by an administrator, 0% initiated by an officer, and of narcotics, it's 88% initiated by an administrator and 4% initiated by an officer. This is a really small number, though, so that 4% is actually 1 call for service. In 24 and 25, notification of administrators occurred 85% of the time. There's 15% or 23 calls for service where it's unknown if an administrator was notified. So we like to take a closer look at those, and we learned that those 23 calls for service occurred at 12 different schools. 12 of them were handled by an officer other than an SRO. 4 were after school hours, and 4 were issued to an adult, and 7 were actually traffic offenses. Those numbers also might look familiar to last year because that's the same breakdown as 23-24 for notification of administrators as well. The persons analysis, this was added to the report last year due to questions about which students had repeated contacts. And to get there, we have to kind of take a little bit of a journey through the data. And the first step is to determine how many unique individuals are within the data. So this year, that number is 861. And of those, we need to see how many are school age, which is 745 this year, which is 3% of the LPS student population. Within those numbers, we need to see how they are appearing in the data. Who's a unique individual as a person responsible, a suspect, and a victim. So those numbers are shown on the right graph there. And if you're quick at math, you'll see that that number is larger than 745, but that's because a juvenile can appear in the data as more than one party type. They can be a victim in one call for service and a person responsible in another one, which is obviously the next question we asked: how many times is that happening? In 24 and 25, there were 155 juveniles that appeared in the data more than once, and there were 30 that appeared 30 times. Oh, sorry, 3 times, apologies. 30 that appeared 3, that'd be a lot. So we wanted to see how they were showing up in the data as well. Is there repeat victimization? Is there repeat referrals into juvenile justice? And this is where we get into some of those small numbers that we can't go too much further into because they're small numbers. Persons responsible, there were 7 juveniles, suspects 17, and victims 36. And just to note on those victims that during a missing person call for service, the party missing is considered a victim, although the vast majority of these calls for service are juveniles who willfully abscond and later return home. So of those 36, 12 of those were as a result of repeat missing person calls for service. And with that, I will turn it over to my supervisor, Jeff Peterson.
Good evening. Like Tricia Todd stated, I'm Jeff Peterson. I'm the Crime Analysis Unit Manager. I've done this for, I think this is year 4, year 5 that I've presented. We're going to spend just a little bit of time talking about disparity. A couple years ago, we added raw numbers to this presentation. This allows complete transparency in what we're presenting and how we present it. So not only here do you see the raw numbers of the population and the race population, on the next slides you're going to see the raw numbers for some of the indexes that we're looking at. A change we made, I believe, 2 years ago was instead of using the LPD race demographics, LPS is using the census data. This provides a little bit of reflection, but we also recognize that it doesn't always align with how some represent their own ethics and racial background. So just keep that in mind. To better understand disparity, have a little analogy, a little example of how that looks. Perfect world, we have a disparity index of 1.0. That's a perfect situation. So for example, let's say we have 10,000 students in the overall population. On average, 1,000 of those students, 10%, were absent five or more times. So that's that disparity of 10%, that 1.0. That's where we want to be at, 1.0. That's a perfect world. So in group A, we have 2,000 students in this group. 200 of them were absent five or more times. That's 10%. That's at 1.0. Group B, we have 1,000 students. 200 were absent 5 or more times. That's 20%. That's a disparity index of 2.0. So that's how we try to explain the disparity. That's that 1.0 that we really want to work at and be at. First thing we're going to look at is the victim disparity index for the middle and high school. That red line indicates the 1.0 that we want to be at. And in the very bottom, you see each of the races and how each of that looks over the past 3 years. The table on the right are those raw numbers that I mentioned just previously. So if you have a desire to do your own disparity index and want to work with some formulas, have at it, or give us a call. We'll be happy to help you with that. As you can see, the African Americans over the past 3 years has slowly declined. It's also important to recognize that when you have such a small population, such as the Native Americans, a few numbers can really dictate those changes. And you see that in the 2024-25 data with that small population. And again, those raw numbers are on the right side. Important to recognize with victims is the missing persons. Missing persons are considered victims in our report, and so we have 73 of those in the calls for service for the data for 2024-2025. So keep that in mind as you look at some of these numbers, that this data includes missing persons. This is the person responsible. So these are individuals receiving referrals at middle and high school. Again, that red line is that perfect 1.0. You can see from the African Americans, fairly consistent with a slight decline in this most current year. And then again, the Native Americans, and that small number dictates that big increase. We also added free lunch and special education this past year, and there you can see those numbers with that. Some takeaways. In prior years, African Americans or 2 or more were overrepresented in both victims and persons responsible, and then Native Americans among persons responsible. However, like I've stated, those small numbers and small population dictate those overall numbers. But this is a takeaway slide from the previous couple slides. Some other miscellaneous information. LPD investigated 4 complaints against the school resource officers this past school year. 3 of them were cleared, and one resulted in a warning. There were 12 commendations for a variety of events for our school resource officers in the last school year. For training, the officers average approximately 53 hours of training credit, which is a variety of topics to include mental health, de-escalation, unbiased training, among other types of training. And then the school resource officers do a variety of presentations within the school year in a lot of the classes, and there you can see some of the topics that they cover. There's a lot of good data that we talk about during this presentation. Tricia Todd talked about the decline in calls for service and the referrals. And here you can see the numbers again. But this really tells the story. This is sort of the crown jewel of what we're trying to accomplish with this program since 2018. And that is the perception, the nationwide perception of the school to prison pipeline. We can see right here with these numbers, it's not occurring here in Lincoln, Nebraska, at the Lincoln Public Schools. We don't have a school to prison pipeline. So we had 3 lodges in the last school year. That was from one incident, 3 lodges. The previous year, 1 lodge, and the 2 prior years were 2 lodges. This is impressive. So this is a good reflection. This entire chart is a good reflection of the work from our school resource officers, working with LPS, working with administrators, working with the teachers, and the success that we've had with this program. This is very impressive. That's all I have, so thank you.
I got a couple more here, so. All right, thank you to Tricia and Jeff. So just the next section we get into is the LPS perception data. And it's important to mention that Lincoln Public Schools has a strategic plan, and it exhibits a commitment to equitable outcomes. This plan started in 2024 and will run through 2029. And this plan has 4 categories: student well-being and outcomes, staff well-being and outcomes, family and community engagement, and district systems and operations. Each category has specific objectives for the district to work towards. What we present here is part of the student well-being and outcomes section of that strategic plan, specifically as it relates to SROs. I will turn it over now to Dr. Don Mazzi to begin our LPS data, perception data review.
Good evening. The LPS perception survey was administered March 17th through April 15th of 2025. And for students, we sent a link and a jump code to principals so that they could determine when their students would take the survey. For staff and families, a email was sent to their email address. For families, they could respond to the survey for as many students as they had at different schools. They could respond for each school that they had contact with. And for staff, they received a separate email for each school that they were associated with. So they could give feedback for each of the schools. For our purposes here, I will spend most of the time talking about our student survey and how the SRO section for the student survey, because they are the most impacted by the SRO being on campus. And the family and staff survey often mirror what the students have the same results. Okay. So in total, 13,084 students responded to the perception survey in last year, or in March and April of last year. 7,900 middle school students, 6,075 high school students. Based on the fall membership of 24-25, this represents about a 57% response rate for our middle and high school students. And according to research, this is a pretty good response rate for educational surveys. Okay. And looking at this particular table here, it just shows how students responded to what is your ethnicity, and students could respond to as many ethnic groups that they felt they belonged to. So that's why that total responses here is larger than the 13,084 of the total individual responses. Okay. So we asked students if they were aware that the SRO was on their school grounds. Of those that responded, 12,804 students responded to this question. 10,803, or 84%, indicated that they knew that the school resource officer was at their school. This is a slight increase over the 81% that was from the 2024 survey. So it's indicating that students are becoming more aware that the SRO was there. And it reflects an increase over the awareness over the last couple of years, where in 22, the awareness was 72%, in 23, 76%, and then, as I said, in 24, 81%. So once we asked them if they were aware that the SRO was on campus, we asked additional questions. We asked them if they felt safer that the SRO was on campus. So those students who are aware there was an SRO on campus were presented with a subsequent question about having that SRO on campus. Of the 10,803 students who indicated they were aware, they were presented with the item, "I feel safer with the school resource officer on campus." This particular item received 9,026 responses. Of those, 86% indicated that they either agree or strongly agree with the statement. In this graphic, it appears that students identifying as Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, American Indian or Alaskan Native, and Black African American as part of their background had less favorable opinions about the safety with the officer on campus. And I say appears because this, as LPD mentioned, especially with the American Indian and the Native Hawaiian, those numbers are so small in our district that one or two students saying something different than the rest is going to sway that percentage one way or the other. Okay, so we asked them if they felt safer with the SRO on campus, and then we also asked if overall they felt the school was safer with the SRO on campus. Okay, and of those who responded that they were aware, 90% responded they agree or strongly agree that they felt the school was safer with the SRO on campus. And if we look again at the bars, it does look like the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander has less favorable opinion about this, but like I said, the numbers are so small that it looks that way, but it's just a few students. Okay. So our next question was asking those students, had they had an interaction with the SRO about an issue at school. Overall, 11% of students indicating that they were aware of the SRO on campus had been contacted by the officer. That was 1,174 out of 10,737. When reviewing the data by ethnic group, caution should be taken because the group sizes are becoming small, and small fluctuations in data could result in what seems like large shifts in proportion. The proportions of students indicating that they were contacted by the school resource officer range from 8% for Asian students to 18% for students with who had Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander in their background. And then we asked the students a series of questions about their interaction or that contact that they had. And we asked them, did the SRO listen to their side of the story? And for the most part, 90% of the students said that they agree or strongly agree that they felt like the SRO listened to them. And that was similar across ethnic groups, as you can see from this graphic. We asked if they felt they were treated fairly. And again, 90% of the total responses were positive. They agree or strongly agree with this statement. And that's even higher than it was last year, which was only 86%. And it's basically similar across ethnic groups, but those two small categories make seem like it has less favorable opinion. And the SRO treated me with respect. 93% were in agreement, agree or strongly agree with this. And across the ethnic groups, our ethnic groups had similar opinions of this. And so for our students, overall, our students reported positive perceptions of the school resource officers being on campus. They felt safer. They felt the school was safer with the SRO being in the building. They felt like that when they had contact or were contacted by the SRO, that the SRO listened to them, treated them fairly, and they felt respected. Overall, students had positive attitudes toward the SRO, and these positive attitudes relatively consistent across ethnic groups. And as I said, when we talked about giving the survey to our families and our staff, the results are very similar. So we're not going to go into a whole lot of detail. So one additional thing with the families, when they knew that their student was being contacted by the SRO, they responded that they felt the SRO was professional and handled the situation. They did a good job of handling the situation. And then when we talked to our staff, if you decide to read the report, because you have so much extra time, you can see there's a lot of detail about all of these questions, and you can see all of the details about what was asked and how staff and family responded. But when you get to the staff, you'll notice that we just used the aggregate data. We just left them as a whole because our staff is overwhelmingly white. But we wanted to show that our staff, I wanted to show that our staff feels safer with the SRO on campus. I feel safer, and you can see that that is an overwhelming percentage that feels safer. And then overall, our school is safer. You can see that they feel that the school is safer as well. Okay. And that is all for the perception data.
Good evening. Ryan Zabava, Director of Student Services, LPS. We're now going to briefly talk about LPS discipline data from the 24-25 school year as it compares to previous years. Our focus here tonight is on out-of-school suspension, as that aligns with our strategic plan goal of reducing out-of-school suspension by 20% by the year 2029. Out-of-school suspension is used when a student has a major rule violation that necessitates the need for a student to be out of school for a period of time. Each time a student is suspended, it counts as one suspension, and we're talking about unique students here. Whether that suspension is for one period of 1 day up to 5 days, which is what the maximum a school can do for an incident violation. This past year, 2,512 secondary students, or 10%, experienced at least one out-of-school suspension. This is very similar to the previous year of 10.1%. We will be looking at data, suspension data for middle and high school students by male, female, ethnicity, special education, ELL, English language learners, and free and reduced lunch with comparisons all the way back to 2015-16. So with these first two tables, on the tables, the yellow highlighted bottom row represents the overall percentage of the student population for a particular subgroup. And the highlighted pink percentages on the table represent an overrepresentation. So for example, during the 24-25 school year, 67% of middle school students suspended were male. However, only 52% of middle school students are male. Therefore, males are overrepresented and they are highlighted at the table. And this would be the same for our high school as well. When we look at out-of-school suspension by ethnicity, there is disproportionately higher percentage of suspensions in both middle and high school for students who are Black, African American, Hispanic, and 2 or more races. American Indian and Alaskan Native were also higher in high school. When we look at our out-of-school suspension data by special education, English language learner, and free and reduced lunch, there is a disproportionately higher number of percentage of students in SE, ELL, and free and reduced lunch in both middle and high school. Although we did see some slight improvement last year for both middle and high school in free and reduced lunch and special education for our high school students, a slight improvement. So our key takeaways for out-of-school suspension, 24-25 suspension data is similar to the 23-24 year. Out-of-school suspension data continues to show evidence of disproportionality for students who are male, Black, Hispanic, 2 or more races, those participating in special education, ELL, and free and reduced lunch. We did see a slight improvement for free and reduced lunch students from 23-24 to 24-25 in middle and high school, and special education students in high school. With that, turn it back over to Brad.
Okay. We asked when we started to kind of use these 3 guiding questions. Is the SRO program improving the safety of our schools? Is the SRO program elevating student discipline issues to law enforcement matters? Is there evidence that our ongoing training for LPS and LPD is demonstrating incremental growth and improvements? That was, that was what we asked you to use as maybe your filter as we listened. 6 goals. I'm not going to read the 6 goals to you again, but you will see now that the takeaways and recommendations from our team that we're about to show you here are structured per goal. So our first one, the goal number 1 was to create a common understanding that school administrators and teachers are ultimately responsible for school discipline and culture. So a call for service is an incident that requires presence of an officer for assistance. A call for service can be initiated by the officer or directed by dispatch at the request of any staff, student, or citizen. And the number of calls for service dropped 17% from last year and has dropped for 3 consecutive years. 14% of calls for service in a referral compared to the 4-year average of 31%. And I think we can draw the conclusion, if you remember that last slide that Jeff had, that the LPD, LPS, SRO program is not demonstrating that they are elevating student discipline issues to law enforcement matters. So that's our first takeaway from goal number 1. Goal number 2, to minimize student discipline issues so they do not become school-based referrals to the juvenile justice system. That's the data that Ryan just shared with you. The key expectation, is to ensure that we're not elevating them to law enforcement matters. So we do have data that supports that. We certainly acknowledge that we continue to have work to do in the area of disparity across the board. And I think, we see some incremental growth, and we attribute a lot of that to training and culture building, but we know we have some more work to do there. Our third goal is to promote effectiveness and accountability, and that's what this oversight board and this process requires, and this annual data review. So This process, also is guided by statute, and I mentioned those statutes there. And so, we are meeting that goal by continuing to go through this evaluation process on an annual basis and receive feedback from this board. Goal number 4 is to provide training available. And you heard in the presentation that the average officer receives 53 hours of training. Some of them, I think, maybe max out at 80. And so, the minimum required is 20. So, even at that, everybody is at least minimum, but there's no way you can just be minimum. You can do that math there pretty quickly. The training is extensive. The statute requires that one administrator per building that has an SRO be trained. LPS actually trains every administrator in all of those buildings right alongside with their SRO. And the CFS and referral data continue to demonstrate that ongoing training is effective in distinguishing between that school discipline and law enforcement. And I think we saw that with a lot of what Tricia shared with us in her portion. Goal 5, to employ best practice so that all students are treated impartially and without bias by SROs and LPS staff in alignment with applicable city and LPS equity policies. So here's where it gets, the PAR framework that the school has implemented is a structured framework that encompasses evidence-based practice. This 25-26 is the first full year of implementation of the accountability matrix that LPS has created, and it's the second full year of the PAR framework being in place. And so LPD and LPS annually provide training regarding student rights, de-escalation techniques, adolescent behavior, implicit bias training, and trauma-enforced responses. And as we've shown you, they actually exceed the training requirements. And there is a positive perception of our SRO students across ethnic groups, as shown in that perception data. So we believe that this training and to employ these best practices is just one of those things that we are doing, but also needs to continue. Goal number 6, utilize best practice for training and oversight. And again, the strategic plan, as Ryan mentioned, has 2 measurable goals that by 2029, we're going to get those disproportionality ratios to 1.2 or less and reduce all suspensions by 20%. Disproportionality still does exist, and we are pleased with the data that is trending down. And also, sometimes the bar graphs, if you look at the tables, the number of students involved is also trending down, which sometimes made that disproportionality go up because it was a smaller number of kids. So like with all data, we're not trying to say that we're just ignoring that because there's still just some disproportionality, but at the same time, we do like the fact that there are fewer students involved overall, which is a good thing. Our special education students are the only subgroup that did show a reduction of that disproportionality while small over those consecutive years. So, recommendations from this team, again, trying to base them on the original goals of the whole program, is our recommendations is to the training. So maintain and continue with the robust training for SRO officers and LPS administrators. Work to increase survey response rates. So while, we could, as Don shared, the number of surveys that came back were lower. So, I suppose one could conclude that maybe that's because they were positive. So you end up, maybe you get a few less, but at the same time, the best way to evaluate something is to have data. And so I think it's imperative on our part to continue to strive for higher response rates year over year to ensure that we have the perception data from our parents and our students and our staff that we are still heading in the right direction. So that we believe that recommendation needs to continue. Continue efforts to improve and respond to disparity. We're going to continue to review the discipline and suspensions. We're going to identify methods and strategies like restorative justice and hope science. We're just a couple of examples of things that inform that PAR framework. New professional development opportunities that we may come across that may continue to help us decrease that disparity. So, again, as mentioned, we're just getting started in that PAR framework, and we feel like that leveling of the playing field is one of the main goals of that framework, and we are hopeful and maybe seeing some early data. It's pretty hard to make judgments, in a quarter of school, but there are some positive trends for us that we aren't going to report them, but we're feeling a little bit better about where things might be going. Review the capacity of the threat assessment team. So I think Tricia mentioned at the beginning that we saw an increase that was that 340% number over the last 3 years, and we felt like it was an opportunity maybe to review this capacity of the threat assessment team. Given that we've experienced the rise in the number of these concerns being reported, it might be the right time to review the capacity of that threat assessment process and to assess and determine whether there may be an additional need to help support the capacity of that team. And if so, what does that look like? How urgent is that need? Are there things that we should be anticipating in the future? So, how is that increased need to respond, coupled with the strong emphasis on intervention, impacted that team's capacity? So that is the fourth recommendation that our team came up with. And now we will open it up to this board and hopefully the folks that helped present tonight, if a question that pops up that is kind of in your area, that you'll be ready to jump up here and answer.
Before we hop into questions from the board, I'll just see if there's any members of the public wishing to speak on this agenda item. Okay, and seeing none, we'll go ahead. And are there any members that have specific questions? Barb?
Remind me, how long have we been doing this, the whole program with the SSKI and this SROs?
We did this in the spring of 2018. We had that meeting with the community in the fall of 2018. And so I think the SROs went into the schools November of 2018.
That was
Middle
high schools. That
schools.
was middle schools.
Yeah.
Middle
Yes.
schools.
Okay. So we would say about 7 years then?
Yeah.
I just wanted to highlight that because when we first started to look at this issue, we were getting comments from the community, and our own data indicated that there was a lot of disparities and a lot of concern. And I just want to say that isn't data analysis a great thing? And isn't it a great thing that when we take data analysis and use it to go and start addressing our problems, how effective we can become, because this program is really successful. And I just want to underline that we need to continue this excellent work, and that I am so proud of this partnership with the city, with the Lincoln Police Department, with LPS, and other community groups, particularly CLCs, to go and turn this around and start really peeling this away. So I'm just going to make some comments, and I think this program has allowed us to become safer schools and make sure that kids' needs are being addressed. And what pops out to me the most for disparities continues to be the free and reduced lunch and our special education students, which I suspect there's overlap with some of the racial disparities in that area as well. And so that has to, as we use data analysis, drive what we do next. And I think you all know that, but I just want to say it out loud. And then here's just one little pet peeve of mine. I've been here for a while, so I've had this pet peeve for a long time. And that is Native Americans are such a small group. Now, if we go to our county jail, we will find out that we have a big problem with disparity. There are needs among our Native American citizens and residents in Lincoln, Nebraska, and Lancaster County that are big and not being addressed. So though I know this is a small group and it feels like, well, gee, why does 2 or 3 go and throw off our numbers? I would suggest that we also use some creative methods to try to peel away what those needs are and what we do next. And maybe focus groups with some of these smaller populations to find out where are the unmet needs and how can we go and start to address these unmet needs. Because the best time to go and change what's going on in the county jail or the state penitentiary is in our schools. And that goes for the other disparities of other groups as well. But I totally understand everybody's, like frustration that just a small number can throw off the numbers so much. But hey, I come from a small town called Bloomfield, Nebraska. Everything's small there. And so every person matters, every student matters. And I'll just close with, gosh, what a great job.
Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you for your feedback, Barb. Appreciate it.
Any other members? Annie, Riley, John? Annie?
Well, I also, 2018, I remember it relatively well, and we were coming off of some hard moments of what are our schools secure, and how should we best do it, talks of all kinds of ways to make that happen, and choosing to go through the SRO route and the MOU route with keeping data was a somewhat fought over choice because we knew it was going to take time and effort. And I just have to agree with Barb that as I was looking through the material, I was like, this is kind of phenomenal that we're at that point where actually you can start using the data to see the improvement. And if we had quit 3 years ago, we wouldn't be able to see that. I also thought it was interesting. I appreciate and value where our recommendations came from, because before I read this part in recommendations, I was taking notes, and you came up with some of the same recommendations I was, which is, we've got to do something about the disparity, especially with our kids who are experiencing suspensions. We have to do away with it. We have to definitely keep working on it. And my other biggest one was that I do think in the next year, to me, one of the biggest things to really get there is the survey, is the numbers in the survey. To me, it still overwhelmingly represents the white population of the city, which has a different perspective of, I've said this before, when my kids were in school, we did not know the SRO officer, was not part of our lives. And so I just think that to me is really important of getting those numbers up. I mean, it's been acknowledged, so I was really happy to see that recommendation, because I think that's where we could find the whole, we could maybe find some of those, what are those new ways that we haven't even thought of, and so forth. And I also think it'll be fascinating to see impact not only the PAR, but our new Yankee Hill, and how new ways of how we're going to try to help with some behavior. And where that will take us. There might be something we want to put, I don't know, I don't do surveys, but in the survey or the question, because those, we're trying some new ways there. I think it would be worth it to ask some of those questions. But I also want to say, as one who's always been known as the naysayer, I don't know, guys, it's really very heartening to see this and to see the numbers going down, and to see, as you said, that in Lincoln we don't at this point, and hopefully going forward, do not have a school-to-prison pipeline. But we only know that because we wanted to know that, and that's what I'm really proud of as well, is that we as a city said, we have to know this, because if it's happening, we should stop it. And even for those 4 or 6 kids, we need to do what we can to stop it. So thank you again for all your hard work. My recommendation is we're not going to stop doing it. Sorry. I feel like we really do need to keep doing it to get to that point where we can do more. I did wonder, though, because I was reading part of the other parts, you were talking about how there's an ongoing conversation always between the training, between the SROs and the admin, and what we need. And I don't know, you don't have to tell me how that happens, but if there's a way for us to strengthen that ability, would be something that I would be willing to listen to, especially if it had any sort of financial impact, or in our budgeting and so forth, because it seems to me that discussion between the city and us is really important for to keep our numbers continuing to going down. I mean, I think we at LPS, we know we have some issues to work on, and we are working on them completely, but it's kind of good to know also. So again, thank you very much, and I do appreciate all the work.
Thanks.
John?
Yes. Again, thank you for the hard work you all have put into this. I have a bunch of questions, but I'm not going to ask those tonight. I do want to get with the police to really figure out, I know there's 53 hours of training, and I see at the end it says among others. I want to know what that among other is, and how can we do something in regards of, I also want to know how the police SROs are responding to the training. Are they understanding the training? Are they ready to go out and perform what they have learned? Are they effective? Do they feel that they are comfortable in that training? So that among others is interesting to me, and I would just like to just maybe sit down with you one day soon to figure that piece out, along with the data piece. And I agree with Barb in regards of the Native Americans, but to get more data, if there's community agencies out here that those kids go to that can help collect that data to bring to you to get more of a report, more of a closer report in what we're reporting, we can definitely do that with community agencies, and they're Lincoln Public School students. Outside the school system, they're still Lincoln Public School students. So we would like to work as a community, would love to work with Lincoln Public Schools as being one. So if you all collecting data, it's not Lincoln Public Schools collecting data, it's we're collecting data. We want to know how can we better serve and be a better representation for these students to be more effective and impactful. We are who we are based on our experiences of life, and through those experiences forms habits of thoughts, behaviors, and behaviors, outcomes. And so we see the outcome, well, I don't see, but the police out in the street see the outcome of what's happening, but we also see a positive outcome as well. And so if we can do our part, that would be great. That was just one thing that I want to just offer and just get more clear understanding of what those 53 hours is, and maybe just to get a clear understanding what that is. And I do see that the numbers went down, and I'm new to this, so correct me if I'm wrong, but you kept mentioning African Americans and Native Americans. So is there a reason, or is there something special that you're doing now that the numbers have gone down from previous years?
I think there's a couple answers to that question. One of the things that did change this year and will continue moving forward is there's been a breakdown between suspects and persons responsible. So in prior reports, suspects and persons responsible were included together in their disparity index. But 3 years ago, we made a coding change that persons responsible are only ones who are referred into the juvenile justice system. So we can kind of parse out who is being referred into juvenile justice versus who's listed as a suspect, and the case could later be unfounded, or through an interview they're actually not involved. So I think we're getting a much more accurate depiction about who is involved. I think that's just part of it, but I know that LPS has been working as well with, I think, the PAR framework and strategic. Yeah.
Okay. And if I have any more questions from that, I know who to talk to. I just don't want to waste nobody's time in here. You know, I know y'all hungry and ready to go.
Any other questions from the board? I got some, so I probably will waste a little bit of time, so I apologize. I'll learn from your example, John. Okay, so on slide 13, I think it was, when it talks about, you know, who initiated the referral, and it said that in 2023 to 2024 school year that there was a increase in, not the percentage kind of flipped from teachers and staff to like administrators being the one to make that referral. Was that like a policy change? Was that something specific, or did that just kind of naturally occur? Because if that occurred kind of naturally, that's kind of weird, right? You know, like what happened?
I think we had some training that occurred starting, I believe, 2 summers ago. Is that right, Joe? I think Joe Wright is gonna speak to this on a little better behalf.
Grab a mic, Joe.
Good evening, Joe Wright from Lincoln Public Schools. For several years now, we've had a mandatory training with our school administrators and SROs together to try and create school teams where they work together multidisciplinarily to create consensus-driven decisions of who's going to take this. Is this an administrative school issue or is this a law enforcement issue? And I think because we've done that year after year after year, we're really getting a lot more traction where it's a normal way to look at things rather than a new way to look at things. And as our younger administrators and even veterans have been at this training and have been, that expectation has been cemented into them that this is how we're going to do this over the course of years. That's built a culture of the administrator and SRO are going to make that consensus decision, and that's driven the reporting for, within the schools. I would say a school culture, maybe Ryan could speak to this, where there's an expectation of, rather than just going to find the SRO, telling him or her what happened, there's a process here, and we know there's a process we have to follow, and that goes through the administrator. So there's an expectation that staff use an administrator to make sure they connect with the SRO rather than bypassing. And with year after year, more and more years of that training, I think we'll see that number grow.
Gotcha.
If that answers your question.
No, I think that answers my question. This is a little bit more of a technical question with students making, initiating contact or whatever. Is that just a student going up to the SRO or the students calling, the police themselves?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. The next question that I had was kind of similar to what John was talking about with the training. So I know, like, back when I was in the middle schools as a social worker, our school resource officer was actually a trained social worker before she went to became a police officer and before she came into the school, and she actually became a school counselor. She was awesome. But I did have some questions about the training also about. I know that police officers, and Chief, I'm going to probably screw up the timeline on this, that like officers have to switch every 3 years or 4 years typically. I'm just kind of curious, like, is there a learning curve with new school resource officers that are going in? Because I know being a first year teacher is really, really hard, right? And I'm just wondering if when there's a turnover of school resource officers, of course, that's going to come with a change in the relationships with students and understanding the school environment. And is there a huge learning curve that you're seeing with new SROs?
From my perspective, I don't think the learning curve is huge, just because the right people with the right temperament are being selected for those positions. It's going to take them some time to get acclimated with the school culture, but very student-centered people are in those positions.
And I think going back to what we talked about just before, because the SRO isn't acting on their own, they're acting as part of a collaborative team while they're making their decisions. We see a lot more empowerment of the SRO to work as a team member with the school administrators. So we get a lot more consistency, even from someone who maybe doesn't have a lot of reps in yet, might be in their first year.
For sure.
So I think that training helps new SROs make great decisions.
And I would also agree. I think your selection is really, like, you picked the social worker for one, and I swear I saw one that had like a teaching back, right? I mean, like, so good job on that. The next question that I had was regarding the student perception data survey, and I know that like a smaller sample size, can really have bigger sways in data, right? But when I look at for the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander, with about 234 students filling that out, and seeing that like 56 students. And that was just my quick math, right? And I'm not a number guy, clearly. But if 56 students said that, they disagreed with feeling safer or that they felt safer at their school, not coming from, not being a statistician, I'm just kind of wondering, what is that statistical number then that becomes, okay, we have a big enough sample size, right? Because I think the message that I had heard was, again, not minimizing or anything like that, but because the sample size was a lot smaller,
So
you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I want to clarify. I wasn't saying that we shouldn't be looking at it. I was just saying that the change in the number will make that percentage look like it swayed a lot from last year, and it could sway again next year because that number is so small. and a couple of students answering differently from last year to this year will make that number look a whole lot different. So that might be why it looks like they're answering different than the other ethnic groups.
Okay, for sure. Yeah, and I didn't mean to imply that LPS was not,
Yeah.
being mindful of that. I was just kind of curious if there was like a certain threshold of number that, as a statistician or whatever, that's.
There is a what we call a power analysis, and I didn't do that for this survey.
Yeah.
That would tell us what the number is.
The other, and I'm also going to be mindful of our time, but one of the other questions that I had was, I wonder, and I don't even know if I'm going to say this in the right way, so maybe I'll just leave this as a comment, right, rather than asking a specific question with it. But when we look about how folks feel safer and did they contact you about an issue at the school, it would be interesting to know if there's any like correlation with like the more interaction that they had, the more of the disagree or strongly disagree that folks felt with being safer. You know what I mean? So like when we see that, like, did the school resource officer contact you about an issue the school year? It was like 18% for Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander. They also have the highest percentage of not feeling safer in the school building. And so that was just one thought that went through my mind, is like, is there some sort of correlation or whatever with that?
If they had multiple contacts.
Yeah, and I'm just kind of curious on that. For the SOR, listen to my side of the story. I saw that there's different response rates to that, right? And I'm not sure what the percentage would be from the 10,000 or the 11,000 that responded. They contact you about an issue, to like what the response rate would have been if 100% of people that filled this out saying that they were contacted by the school resource officer. What do you have any like theories or reasons or kind of an explanation on why some folks may say that they were contacted by a school resource officer but then didn't feel like completing out they listened to my side of the story, or they felt fairly in the situation, they were treated with respect?
Yes. These questions are at the end of the survey. Okay. And kids get tired. And
for
the
sure.
completion rate is.
The one good thing that I do want to just note is, when we look at, there was a higher rate of folks that feel like they might not have listened to their side of the story, they weren't treated fairly, but when it comes to treated with respect, that did have a higher response rate. And folks did feel like even if they feel like they weren't listened to, they were treated with respect. There was a higher rate of that, which I thought was a good indicator. The family perception survey, and I'll just keep this super, super brief. I'll skip over that and I'll ask that later. Do you have any reasons or potential explanations or theories about, with free and reduced lunch being such a high rate percentage of out of school suspensions, like why that is?
I'm sorry.
What's the question?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Sometimes I ramble a lot and say a lot of words. So knowing that with the free and reduced, the students that receive free and reduced lunch, that there's a higher rate for percent of yearly out of school suspensions, and that seems to be, a higher disproportion compared to their peers. Why do you think that is?
I think there's a lot of factors involved in that. I don't know if there's one single thing that would I could pinpoint that would tell us that. If I were able to, I'd probably write a book. But I just think that there's a lot of challenges people face in life. I don't know if that has an impact. If kids aren't getting sleep, if they're not getting their basic needs met, they're coming to school. They're coming to school upset.
Mm-hmm.
That would be maybe one explanation as to why, but I can't pinpoint that. Yeah.
And it could, any number of those subgroups. If you are involved in 5 of them,
Yeah.
4 of them, you're going to show up 4 times in the data too. So it's likely not like those kids in those groups aren't just in the free and reduced lunch group. I think that one of you guys made that point too. And then all of those other factors, and that there's a myriad of what those factors might be. So Ryan shared one with you, but that's also something that's hard for us to peel apart.
Yeah.
Would be that.
For sure. Just being mindful of time, I'm just going to say this as a comment. I would be interested to know, like, the biggest reasons why there are out of school suspensions, right? Is it, assault? Is it, whatever? I would just be kind of curious on how you all categorize that and the highest reason for that, right? And then what is that overlap between the reason why students are getting suspended and then also, how it relates to some of these percentages across the board.
Yeah, we absolutely have that data broken down, and that can be shared.
Awesome,
Yeah.
awesome. And then John already hit my question about, is there a standard training? What does the training look like? And yeah, thanks so much for giving me an extra 15 minutes. Anyone else have any questions? Yeah.
Just something that you said, Don, made me think, if we're going to be looking at the surveys and trying to figure out how to bring up the numbers, for 5 years, we've had the SRO information at the end of the survey for students. Perhaps it's time to mix it up to see if that would change anything, like before they get tired. Maybe we let them get tired about, I don't know what the other questions are. That they're all, I know they're all important, but maybe throwing a dice in the air and like seeing, because it could possibly shed a light on something. It's just an idea.
Anything else you all want to share? All right, thank you all so much. Seriously, I appreciate that. We'll go ahead and move on to our next item, which is adjournment. Our next meeting is scheduled for Thursday, February 26th, 2026. Can you believe that? At 12:15 here in the City Council chambers. The focus of that meeting will be reviewing the annual report for Community Learning Centers Initiative, and I'm looking at you, Noah. All right, can we do a roll call to adjourn?
A roll call for adjournment? Barb?
Yes.
James?
Yes.
Riley?
Yes.
Don?
Yes.
Well, yes.
All right, see y'all in February.